Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Monty if you're new here, and today I'm going to be talking about everything that I read in January. I have 4 books to go over. One of them I did DNF, but I still think it's worth mentioning, and the other 3 I read all the way through. I'm going to start by talking about the book I DNF'd, which is Seveneves by Neal Stephenson. This is a hard sci-fi book that follows the aftermath of the moon splitting into 7 pieces by an unknown force and what that means for the future of humanity. I wanted to love this book so badly because 2 of my absolute favorite people on the planet love this book and have been wanting me to read it for years. But as I progressed in the story, I couldn't make myself care enough to see it all the way through. I gave this such a solid effort. I read a quarter of it before I put it down, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but this book is over 800 pages, meaning that I read 200 pages before calling it quits. So I tried. I really tried. It's not that this was completely uninteresting to me. There were parts where I found myself really getting into it, but they would immediately be followed by sections that were so bogged down in technical detail that I would just get pulled out of the story. There were also so many characters to keep track of, and eventually, as I continued on, reading this book felt more and more like a chore. A small part of me wants to give this another shot, but I think the smarter part of me knows that it isn't in the cards. I do want to say that I started this book at the very beginning of December, and I didn't put it down until mid-January. So it ate up 6 weeks of reading time for me. And the second I put it down, I felt like a weight had been lifted off of my shoulders and like I was finally able to read books that I wanted to read. And I wished I had DNF'd sooner. So this is your reminder that if you're dreading picking up a book, let it go. I should have done that much earlier than I did. The first book I actually finished in January is Can't Get Enough by Kennedy Ryan. Okay, so this is part of an interconnected romance series, and I loved the first 2 books. I think that Kennedy Ryan writes such deeply layered characters with very real struggles. In this 3rd book, we are following Hendrix, who is like this powerhouse of a woman. She is super motivated and very successful, and she also has this really big, bold, fun personality. At the start of the book, Hendrix meets this tech billionaire at a party, and right away they are super physically attracted to one another, but getting together presents a very serious work conflict for Hendrix, and she is not one to give into the temptation of a romance at the expense of her career. Simultaneously, Hendrix is taking care of her mother, who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and whose condition is progressively worsening. Those are kind of the basics of the story. I do have to say that this installment is the weakest for me. And before I get into everything that I didn't like, I do want to say what I really enjoyed. I love the way that Kennedy Ryan writes about community and friendship. There were a couple of scenes in here that really pulled at my heartstrings, where we get to see people rally behind a character that is in desperate need of support. And any kind of depiction of found family like that is just so for me. What I didn't like about this book really boils down to the romance between Hendrix and Maverick. I did not like Maverick, especially in comparison to the male leads in the other 2 books in the series, who are incredible. There are so many things to call out. For one, we are told over and over what a good father he is, but not once are we shown a single instance of that. And then, if you'll remember, this guy is a billionaire, right? So we know that he's in a position of power. And there's a scene where Hendrix is walking by his home office and she overhears him on the phone with an employee. And he says something along the lines of, do your fucking job. And he's continuing to talk down to this employee. And Hendrix is super turned on by it. I was super turned off by it. And finally, Hendrix repeatedly tells Maverick that she is not ready to pursue something with him and that she doesn't want to put her career in jeopardy. Does he listen? No, absolutely not. Instead, he pushes the issue over and over with no respect for her and no respect for her boundaries until he gets what he wants. And we're supposed to view that as being romantic. For me to like a romance, I have to like both characters. I do. And I very much disliked one of the characters. Aside from all that, this book was entirely too long. I was ready for it to be over 200 pages onwards, and it's like 450 pages or something like that. Something I've noticed in Kennedy Ryan's other books, but I didn't pay as much attention to because I was so taken by other aspects of those stories, is that she tends to over-explain her characters' emotional epiphanies rather than showing us organically through their actions what it is they've learned. And it can feel pretty cheesy at times. This ended up being a 2.5 out of 5 stars for me. The best parts were everything having to do with Hendrix's personal life, and the worst parts were everything having to do with the romance. The second book that I read in January that I am so excited to talk about is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. This book had such a hold on me while I was reading it. It was one of those stories that commanded my full attention. It was such a propulsive read. I loved it to pieces. I think this would be a great introduction to someone who's afraid of nonfiction because it reads like a novel. It's so utterly fascinating. So this is kind of a hybrid between a memoir and an investigative journalism piece. Usually when you read a memoir, you're learning about the author's life, but in this case, we're learning more about an event that the author happened to be present for, which is the 1996 Mount Everest climbing disaster. Jon Krakauer is a journalist, and he was hired by Outside Magazine to summit Everest and to write on his experience. And that's exactly what he did. It just so happened to be one of the deadliest seasons on the mountain at that point in time. There is so much to this that I learned about, such as why people climb Everest in the first place, what the preparation looks like, what it physically entails, the history behind its tourism, and the environmental impact of it all. And then on top of all of those educational pieces, he makes you feel so invested in the fate of the people on these various expeditions. Everyone that he met along the way, you also feel like you know them, which makes the disastrous ending of the book all the more devastating. Krakauer is an excellent storyteller. The last third of the book, my heart was fully in my stomach. It was so tragic. There were so many ethical dilemmas at play about who to try and save. Just like gut-wrenching stuff. This was a reading experience that I will never forget. And I am not alone in feeling that way. Many, many people also love this book the way I do, and for very good reason. Something that I do want to mention that I want to put out there is there is some controversy in the mountaineering community regarding Jon Krakauer's take on how everything played out on the mountain and who was at fault for certain situations. And from my standpoint, you know, I wasn't there, and it is just impossible for me to know the truth of the matter. I kept all of that in mind while I read it, and I very much viewed this as a personal account of what happened, not a factual account. But all in all, such a gripping read, 5 out of 5 stars. easily. And the last book that I have to talk about is none other than Foster by Keegan. If you didn't see my other video where I ranked every single book that I read last year, I crowned Small Things Like These by Keegan my #1 pick of 2025. Immediately after finishing that book, I went and I requested Foster through the library. And I just knew that it was going to be an incredible read. And I was not disappointed in the slightest. This is about a young girl in Ireland whose parents can no longer support her. Their family has grown too large and they even have another kid on the way. So it's a too many mouths to feed kind of situation. They send their daughter away to go and live with this elderly couple that I believe is loosely related to her. And the story is just about this girl's time living with the elderly couple and what that means to her. Here's the thing. I don't want to oversell this to the wrong person because I'm afraid that the way I feel about this book, it will cut deep if I hear anyone speak ill of it. So I'm gonna lay it out clearly who this is and isn't for. If you need something that is loud, that has a heavy plot, that moves at a rapid pace to be kept entertained, look elsewhere. But if you enjoy something that is quiet, that is subtle, that has a huge emotional payoff, if you want to read something in a single day or in a single sitting, then I highly recommend that you give this a go. It astounds me how much I was able to feel in so little. Huge Keegan fan over here. I love her. She has really challenged my own understanding of my reading preferences. I used to always think and say that when it came to reading, I was in it for the plot, but I feel like I've really evolved over time and have come to appreciate the beauty of a character-driven story. If you know any authors similar to Keegan, please drop those names in the comments below. I can guarantee you that I will be looking into those recommendations. Another very obvious 5 stars from me. So that is everything that I read in January. I thought it would also be fun to tell you what I'm currently in the middle of and what I've recently downloaded onto my Kindle from the library, because it's likely that you will see these books appear in my next reading wrap up. Okay, so right now I am exactly a quarter of the way through Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. I read her other book, Migrations, a few years ago when it came out, and I really liked it. And then this book, of course, blew up in 2025, and it was on so many people's list of favorite books of the year. So I had to get in on that. And so far, I am undecided. I don't know how I feel about this story yet, but I do feel like I'm kind of in it at this point and itching to pick up the book. So having a good time, but I don't know whether I absolutely love it quite yet. My nonfiction pick of the month is going to be Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. My hold for that just came through. And then I have 3 other books downloaded. So first up is The Compound. This is described as a cross between Lord of the Flies and Love Island. I'm actually pretty unfamiliar with both of those, but it still sounds entertaining to me. I also have The Giver by Lois Lowry. This is a book that I read in middle school, but I don't really remember how everything plays out. I do remember the premise of it. I feel like these dystopian stories hit harder when you read them as an adult, even though they're written for a younger audience. The same way that Hunger Games hit me harder as a 30-year-old than it did when I first read it as an 18-year-old. You know what I'm saying? And then the last book I have is called Lonely Crowds by Stephanie Wambugu. I honestly don't remember where I saw this book, but I'm pretty positive it was featured in someone's top books of the year. And I immediately was like, yep, I'm gonna go download that. But I don't remember anything about the premise. So I'm gonna go into it blind and hope for the best. And I think that's it. Let me know if you read any of these books. I love having conversations with you all in the comments. If you watched this video all the way through, thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.